The dust devil that swirled across Zachariah Abbott's land on that scorching August afternoon in 1882 carried more than just prairie dirt and dried grass. It carried a woman who stumbled through the haze like a ghost, her dress torn and streaked with mud, her dark hair matted against her pale face. And when she finally crumpled to the ground not 20 yards from his fence line, Zachariah dropped the hammer he had been using to repair his barn door and ran faster than he had moved in years. She was breathing, barely, her lips cracked and bleeding, her skin hot enough to fry an egg on. Zachariah had seen plenty of suffering in his 32 years, had witnessed death and destruction during his time as a cavalry scout, before settling down to ranch life. But something about this woman lying unconscious in the Nebraska dirt struck him differently. He scooped her up, surprised at how light she felt, and carried her across the yard to his modest ranch house, kicking the door open with his boot and laying her gently on his bed. The first thing he did was get water. Not too much. His mother had taught him that years ago, just enough to wet her lips and get some moisture into her mouth. The woman did not stir, did not even flutter an eyelid, and Zachariah felt a cold knot of fear in his stomach. He had no idea who she was or where she had come from, but out here in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, you did not ask too many questions before you helped someone. The nearest town was 10 miles east, and the summer heat had been brutal for weeks, turning the usually green prairie into a brown wasteland. He spent the next hour tending to her, wiping her face and arms with cool water, checking for injuries beyond the obvious exhaustion and dehydration. Her hands were blistered, her feet bloody through her worn boots, and there were bruises on her arms that looked like finger marks. Zachariah felt his jaw tighten. He had seen those kinds of bruises before, knew what they meant, and he made a silent promise to whoever had hurt this woman that they would answer for it if they ever crossed his path. By nightfall, she still had not woken. Zachariah made himself a cold supper of bread and cheese, unable to tear himself away from her bedside for long. He had moved a chair into the bedroom and sat watching her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest like a prayer. His cattle could wait, his chores could wait, everything could wait until he knew this woman would live. The second day brought no change. Zachariah managed to get more water into her, supporting her head and letting drops fall between her parched lips, but she remained lost in whatever darkness held her. He found himself talking to her, telling her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised and the horses he bred, about the quiet life he had built for himself after leaving the chaos of military service. He told her his name, repeated it several times as if the sound of it might anchor her back to the waking world. On the third day, as dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, she opened her eyes. Zachariah had dozed off in his chair, his long legs stretched out and his chin dropped to his chest, when he heard a small sound, barely more than a whisper. His eyes snapped open to find her staring at him, confusion and fear mingling in eyes that were the color of storm clouds, a gray so deep and striking that he felt his breath catch. "You are safe," he said quickly, keeping his voice low and steady. "You are on my ranch about 10 miles west of Scottsbluff. You collapsed 3 days ago. I have been looking after you." She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. Zachariah was already moving, pouring fresh water from the pitcher on the nightstand into a tin cup and helping her sit up enough to drink. She gulped it down desperately, and he had to pull the cup away gently. "Slow," he said. "You will make yourself sick." She nodded, leaning back against the pillows he propped behind her, and this time when she spoke, the words came clearer. "Where am I, my ranch? Zachariah Abbott's ranch. Who are you?" The woman closed her eyes for a long moment, and Zachariah wondered if she had fallen back asleep. But then she looked at him again, and he saw something break in those gray eyes, saw tears well up and spill over. Penelope, Penelope Sutherland, I was running. Zachariah pulled his chair closer, settling into it with the patience that came from years of working with skittish horses. Running from what? From whom? Penelope corrected, her voice shaking. My husband. My late husband now, I suppose, though I cannot be certain he is dead. I only know I had to leave before he killed me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible. Zachariah had suspected abuse, but hearing it confirmed made his blood run hot. Tell me what happened if you can. Take your time. Penelope's story came in fragments, pieces of a nightmare that Zachariah had to fit together like a broken puzzle. She had come west from Pennsylvania 2 years earlier, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. The man who had sent for her, Marcus Sutherland, had seemed decent enough in his letters, respectable and hardworking, but the reality had been far different. He had been a drunk and a tyrant, running a failing farm 20 miles north and taking his frustrations out on Penelope with his fists and his belt. She had endured it for nearly 2 years, too ashamed to write home, too afraid to run. But 3 weeks ago, Marcus had come home in a rage unlike anything she had seen before. He had lost money gambling, lost more than he could pay, and the men he owed had given him a deadline. In his fury, he had beaten Penelope so badly she thought she would die, and when she had woken the next morning, she had found him passed out in the barn, a bottle of whiskey clutched in his hand. She had taken her chance. Packed nothing, taken nothing except the clothes on her back and what little money she could find hidden in Marcus's desk. She had started walking, heading south because it seemed as good a direction as any, avoiding the main roads and traveling mostly at night. She had run out of food after the first week, run out of water after the second, and by the time she had stumbled onto Zachariah's land, she had been more dead than alive. I remember seeing your fence, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I remember thinking that if I could just make it over that fence, I might find help. And then everything went black. Zachariah sat in silence for a long moment after she finished, processing everything she had told him. Finally, he leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees, and met her eyes. You are safe here. I will not let anyone hurt you. Do you understand me? You can stay as long as you need to recover, and then we will figure out what comes next. Fresh tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks, but these were different, tears of relief rather than pain. Why would you do that? You do not even know me. Because it is the right thing to do, Zachariah said simply, and because no one deserves what you have been through. Over the following days, Penelope slowly regained her strength. Zachariah moved himself to the small guest room off the kitchen, giving her his bedroom and his bed, and he cooked for her simple meals of beef stew and cornbread, fresh eggs and potatoes from his garden. She was a quiet presence at first, almost afraid to take up space, but gradually she began to relax, began to believe that Zachariah truly meant what he said about her being safe. On the 6th day, she got out of bed and insisted on helping with something, anything. Zachariah had protested, but he saw the determination in her eyes and relented, letting her help him shell peas on the porch while he mended tack. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Penelope spoke. Tell me about yourself, she said. You know everything about me, but I know nothing about you except your name and that you are a far better man than I have any right to expect. Zachariah felt heat rise in his cheeks at the compliment. He was not used to such direct praise. Not much to tell. I grew up in Missouri, joined the cavalry when I was 18, Spent 10 years scouting and fighting and doing things I would rather forget. When my time was up, I came out here, bought this land, and started over. That was 4 years ago. Been here ever since, just me and my cattle and horses." "No family?" Penelope asked, then immediately looked apologetic. "I am sorry, that is too personal." "It is all right," Zachariah assured her. "My parents are both gone, died of cholera when I was 16. I had a sister, but she married and moved to California. We write sometimes, but I have not seen her in years. As for a wife, well, I guess I never found the right woman, and ranch life is lonely. Not many women want to live out here, miles from anywhere." Penelope was quiet for a moment, her fingers moving mechanically through the peas. "I think it is beautiful here. Lonely, yes, but beautiful. There is something honest about it, something clean. After everything with Marcus, all his lies and his cruelty, I find I appreciate honesty more than I ever thought possible." Something in the way she said it, in the soft vulnerability of her voice, made Zachariah's chest tighten. He glanced over at her, taking in the way the afternoon sun caught in her dark hair, now clean and braided down her back, the way her gray eyes seemed clearer and brighter with each passing day. She was beautiful, he realized, not in the flashy way of saloon girls or the pampered way of city women, but in a quiet, enduring way that spoke of strength and resilience. He looked away quickly, focusing on the bridle in his hands. It was too soon to think such things, too soon to feel the flutter of something that might be attraction. She had just escaped a nightmare marriage, and the last thing she needed was another man complicating her life. But as the days turned into weeks, Zachariah found it increasingly difficult to ignore what he was feeling. Penelope had bloomed under his care, her bruises fading, her wounds healing, her spirit gradually returning. She had taken over the cooking, insisting that it was the least she could do, and Zachariah had come home from working the cattle to find dinner waiting and the house tidied, small touches that made his bachelor existence feel suddenly like a home. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership that felt natural and easy. Penelope would help with the chickens and the garden while Zachariah worked the ranch, and in the evenings they would sit on the porch and talk, sharing stories and dreams and comfortable silences. Zachariah learned that Penelope loved to read, that she had brought only one book with her from Pennsylvania, and had read it so many times she had the words memorized. He rode into Scottsbluff the next day and returned with 4 new books, reveling in the way her face lit up like Christmas morning. Penelope learned that Zachariah was a man of few words but deep feeling, that his silences were not coldness but thoughtfulness, that his gruff exterior hid a heart as big as the Nebraska sky. She learned that he sang to his horses when he thought no one was listening, old cavalry songs in a surprisingly good baritone, and that he had a weakness for apple pie that made him almost bashful when she baked one. It was on a warm evening in late September, nearly 2 months after Penelope had collapsed on his land, that things shifted between them. They were sitting on the porch as usual, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, when Penelope suddenly spoke. "I received a letter today," she said quietly, "from the marshal's office in Scottsbluff. They found Marcus." Zachariah's head snapped around, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver he still wore out of old habit. "Is he coming here? Does he know where you are?" "No," Penelope said quickly, reaching out to touch his arm, the first time she had initiated physical contact since she had arrived. "He is dead, Zachariah. He died 2 days after I left. Apparently he went into the barn drunk, fell, and hit his head. They found him a week later when neighbors noticed the smell. The marshal wanted to notify me as his legal widow." Zachariah should have felt relief, and he did, but there was something else in Penelope's voice, something that sounded almost like regret. Are you all right?" "I do not know," Penelope admitted, her hand still resting on his forearm, warm and slight. "I should feel something, should not I? Sadness or grief or even satisfaction that he can never hurt me again. But I feel nothing for him, nothing at all. What does that make me?" "Human," Zachariah said firmly, covering her hand with his own. "It makes you human, Penelope. You do not owe that man anything, not even your grief." She looked up at him then, her gray eyes shining with unshed tears, and Zachariah felt something break loose in his chest, something he had been holding back for weeks. Without thinking, without planning, he reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "You are the strongest person I have ever met," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The bravest, the kindest, the most remarkable woman I have ever known. And I know this is not the right time. I know you need time to heal and to figure out who you are without fear hanging over you, but I need you to know that I care for you. More than I should, more than is probably wise, but I care for you, Penelope." Her breath caught, and for a moment Zachariah thought he had made a terrible mistake, had pushed too far too fast. But then Penelope was leaning into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his where it rested against her cheek. "I care for you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to admit it, so afraid that I was just transferring my gratitude into something else. But it is not gratitude, Zachariah. It is real. You are the first man who has ever made me feel safe, the first man who has ever treated me like I matter. I do not know what that means or where it can go, but I care for you so much it terrifies me." Zachariah felt his heart hammer against his ribs. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. A gentle kiss that held all the tenderness and promise he could not yet put into words. Penelope's arms came around him, and they held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The next weeks were a time of careful exploration, of learning each other in new ways. Zachariah courted Penelope the way she deserved to be courted, with patience and respect, and a gentleness that made her cry more than once. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, taught her to ride his gentlest mare, took her into Scottsbluff for the town dance where he held her in his arms and waltzed her around the floor like she was something precious. Penelope blossomed under his attention, her confidence growing, her smile coming easier. She started talking about the future, about things she wanted to do and see, and Zachariah listened to every word, storing them away like treasures. He wanted to give her everything, wanted to make up for every moment of pain and fear she had endured. But more than that, he simply wanted to be with her, to wake up every morning knowing she was there and fall asleep every night with her voice the last thing he heard. It was in early November, as the first snow began to fall, that Zachariah asked her to marry him. They were in the barn, checking on a mare that was due to foal any day, when he suddenly turned to her, took both her hands in his, and spoke the words that had been burning in his heart for months. "Penelope Sutherland, I know this might seem fast, and I know you have every reason to be cautious about marriage after what you went through, but I love you. I love you more than I thought I could love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that marriage can be something beautiful, something safe and good and full of joy. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, not because you have to, not because you need protection or a home, but because you want to, because you love me the way I love you?" Penelope stared at him, her eyes wide and shining in the lamplight, and for a heart-stopping moment, Zachariah thought she would say no, thought he had pushed too hard, asked too much. But then she was nodding, tears streaming down her face, and she threw her arms around his neck and said yes, 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 over and over until the word lost meaning and became simply a sound of pure happiness. They married 2 weeks later in the small church in Scottsbluff, with the minister and his wife as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Penelope wore a simple dress of pale blue that Zachariah had bought for her in the general store, and she carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers that he had saved from the ones he had picked for her throughout the fall. Zachariah wore his best suit, the one he had worn maybe twice in his entire life, and when he saw Penelope walking toward him down the aisle, he felt tears prick his eyes at how beautiful she looked, how right this all felt. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad, and when it came time for the vows, Zachariah and Penelope spoke them clearly and firmly, their voices ringing out in the small church like promises carved in stone. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachariah kissed Penelope with all the love and tenderness he possessed, and the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The wedding reception was held at the boarding house, and the whole town celebrated with them, bringing food and drink and good wishes. Zachariah danced with his wife, the word still feeling new and wonderful in his mind, and he watched her laugh and talk with the townswomen, watched her relax and be happy in a way he had never seen before. This was the woman she was meant to be, he realized, the woman she would have always been if life had been kinder. When they finally returned to the ranch that night, riding together on Zachariah's big bay gelding with Penelope's arms wrapped around his waist, the house looked different somehow. It was not just his house anymore, not just his ranch. It was theirs, a home they would build together, a future they would create side by side. That first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches. Zachariah took his time, determined to show Penelope that physical love could be something beautiful rather than something to endure. He kissed away her tears, soothed away her fears, and when they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness and completion that left them both breathless. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Penelope pressed her ear to Zachariah's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered. "I never thought I deserved to be this happy." "You deserve everything," Zachariah replied, his fingers stroking through her hair. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." The winter of 1882 was hard, as Nebraska winters often were, but Zachariah and Penelope weathered it together. They spent long evenings by the fire, Penelope reading aloud from her books while Zachariah worked on tack or whittled small figures from wood. They cooked together, worked together, laughed together, and slowly, steadily, they built a partnership that was stronger than any blizzard. Spring came with a rush of green and new life, and with it came news that made Penelope both nervous and excited. She was pregnant, expecting their first child in the fall. Zachariah reacted with a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the barn, and he swept Penelope up in his arms and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. He became even more protective than before, insisting she rest and let him handle the heavier chores. Penelope rolled her eyes at his fussing but secretly loved every moment of it, loved the way he would rest his hand on her still flat stomach and talk to the baby as if it could already hear him. This was what family was supposed to be, she realized, this warmth and care and unconditional love. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Penelope's belly grew, so did their excitement. They prepared the small bedroom off the main room as a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and building a cradle from pine wood that Zachariah sanded until it was smooth as silk. Penelope sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her heart full of wonder at the life growing inside her. On a crisp October morning in 1883, Penelope went into labor. Zachariah rode hard to Scottsbluff to fetch the doctor and the midwife. And for the next 12 hours, he paced the porch like a caged animal, listening to Penelope's cries with a sense of helplessness that made him want to break something. But finally, just as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound, a thin, reedy wail that made his heart stop. The midwife emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Abbott, a big, healthy son, and your wife did beautifully." Zachariah rushed past her, finding Penelope propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a white blanket. She looked up as he entered, and the smile she gave him was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Zachariah approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby in Penelope's arms. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. And when Zachariah carefully took him, feeling the warm, solid weight of his child for the first time, he felt tears stream down his face unchecked. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise you, I will love you and protect you every day of your life." They named him Zachary Thomas Abbott, after his father and Penelope's late grandfather, and he became the center of their world. Zachariah proved to be a devoted father, getting up for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing those old cavalry songs as lullabies. Penelope watched him with their son and fell even more deeply in love, if such a thing was possible. The years rolled by in a steady rhythm of seasons and growth. Little Zachary grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes, always underfoot and full of questions. 2 years after Zachary was born, Penelope gave birth to a daughter, a tiny slip of a girl they named Patricia Rose, who inherited her mother's delicate features and her father's stubborn determination. The ranch prospered under Zachariah's careful management and Penelope's clever business sense. She had a head for numbers that surprised both of them, and she took over the ranch accounts, finding ways to save money and invest in better stock. They expanded their herd, bought more land, built a bigger barn and a new chicken coop. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and hard winters and sick cattle, but they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. One evening in the summer of 1888, almost 6 years to the day after Penelope had collapsed on his land, Zachariah and Penelope sat on their porch watching Zachary chase fireflies while Patricia toddled after him on unsteady legs. The sun was setting in its usual spectacular display, painting the sky in colors that seemed impossible, and Zachariah reached over and took Penelope's hand. "You remember the day I found you?" he asked quietly. Penelope squeezed his fingers. "Every single detail. I remember thinking I was going to die out there in that heat, that I had used up all my luck and all my strength. And then I saw your fence, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I had enough left to make it." "I am glad you made it," Zachariah said, his voice thick. "I am glad you found me." "We found each other," Penelope corrected, turning to look at him with those storm-gray eyes that still had the power to steal his breath. "You saved my life, Zachariah, in every way a person can be saved. You gave me safety and kindness and love when I thought those things did not exist for me anymore. You gave me a home and a family and a future I never dreamed I could have." "You saved me too," Zachariah replied. "I did not even know how lonely I was until you were here. This ranch was just a place before you, just land and cattle and hard work. You made it a home, Penelope. You made it mean something." They kissed then, soft and sweet, the kiss of two people who knew each other completely and loved each other anyway, loved each other because of it. From the yard, Zachary called out that he had caught a firefly, and they broke apart laughing, heading down to admire his prize before releasing it back into the gathering dusk. As the years continued to pass, the Abbott family became a fixture in Scottsbluff. Zachariah served on the town council, helping to make decisions about schools and roads and water rights. Penelope started a small school in their front room during the winter months, teaching the ranch children their letters and numbers. Zachary grew tall and strong, learning ranching from his father and showing a natural gift with horses. Patricia proved to be as smart as her mother, devouring every book she could get her hands on and announcing at age 7 that she intended to be a teacher. In 1892, Penelope gave birth to their third and final child, another son they named Paul Matthew. He was a surprise baby, coming 10 years after Zachary and 8 years after Patricia, and he kept the household lively with his boundless energy and mischievous nature. Zachariah joked that Paul was his payback for all the trouble he had caused his own parents, but he adored the boy, as did everyone else. Life settled into a comfortable pattern, full of love and laughter and hard work. There were challenges, of course, there always were. There was the year the drought nearly broke them, and the winter when Patricia got pneumonia and they almost lost her. There was the time Zachary broke his leg falling from a horse, and the summer when a prairie fire came dangerously close to the ranch. But through it all, Zachariah and Penelope stood together, their love the foundation on which everything else was built. As their children grew older and began to find their own paths, Zachariah and Penelope found themselves circling back to where they started, just the two of them against the world. Zachary married a girl from town in 1903 and took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, building his own house on the far side of the property. Patricia went to normal school in Lincoln and returned as a certified teacher, establishing the first permanent school in Scottsbluff. Paul, true to form, could not settle down, and at 18 he headed west to Montana to try his hand at prospecting. Through all the changes, through all the joy and heartache of watching their children grow and leave, Zachariah and Penelope remained each other's constant. They grew older together, Zachariah's dark hair turning silver, Penelope's developing threads of white that she refused to hide. They moved a little slower, felt the cold a little more, but their love never dimmed, never faltered. On a warm summer evening in 1910, almost 28 years after that fateful day when Penelope had collapsed on his land, Zachariah and Penelope sat in their rocking chairs on the porch, watching the sun set. They were both in their 60s now, their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work, but their hands were still intertwined, their fingers still fitting together perfectly. "You have any regrets?" Penelope asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Zachariah thought for a long moment, his thumb tracing lazy circles on the back of her hand. "Not a single one," he said finally. "Every choice I made led me to you, led me to this life we built together. How could I regret any of that?" Penelope smiled, that same smile that had stolen his heart all those years ago. "I used to wonder what my life would have been like if I had not answered that advertisement, if I had not come west and married Marcus. But then I realized that without all that pain, without hitting rock bottom, I never would have found you. I never would have known what real love feels like. So I cannot regret it either, as terrible as it was, because it brought me here." "I love you," Zachariah said, the words as true and necessary as breathing. I have loved you since the moment you opened those gray eyes and looked at me, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Penelope whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this beautiful life." They sat there as the sun disappeared and the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them through courtship and marriage, through births and losses, through every triumph and struggle. The ranch was quiet around them, the cattle settled for the night, the horses drowsing in their stalls. In the distance, they could see the lights of Zachary's house, could hear the faint laughter of their grandchildren playing in his yard. This was their legacy, Zachariah thought, not just the land or the cattle or the buildings they had constructed, but the love they had nurtured and the family they had created. It had started with a woman collapsing in the dust and a cowboy who refused to leave her to die, and it had grown into something bigger and more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. Zachariah and Penelope became great-grandparents, watching with joy as their grandchildren had children of their own. The ranch evolved with the times, acquiring its first automobile in 1915, though Zachariah never quite trusted the contraption and preferred his horses until the end. The world beyond Scottsbluff changed too, with a war raging in Europe that eventually pulled America into its grasp, and both Zachariah and Penelope worried every day that Paul's adventurous spirit might lead him to enlist. But Paul had settled down by then, married to a strong-willed woman in Montana, and raising his own family, sending letters full of love and humor that Penelope read aloud on the porch. Patricia's school had grown into a proper brick building with 3 classrooms and 2 other teachers, and she was a respected figure in town, known for her fair discipline and her passion for learning. Zachary had expanded the ranch even further, making the Abbott name synonymous with quality cattle throughout Nebraska. Through it all, Zachariah and Penelope remained the heart of the family, the center around which everyone else orbited. They celebrated every holiday at the big house, the one Zachariah had built as a modest bachelor dwelling, and that had expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. The house was filled with noise and life during those gatherings, grandchildren running through the halls, the smell of Penelope's cooking filling every room, and Zachariah would stand in the doorway sometimes and simply marvel at what they had created. In the spring of 1918, Zachariah fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it settled in his lungs and would not shift. The doctor came, tried various treatments, but Zachariah's body, worn out from decades of hard physical labor, could not fight it off. He grew weaker, spending more time in bed, and Penelope refused to leave his side, sleeping in a chair next to him and holding his hand through the long nights. On a morning in early May, with the sun streaming through the bedroom window and the sounds of the ranch waking up around them, Zachariah opened his eyes and looked at Penelope, really looked at her, memorizing every line and curve of her beloved face. "I am not afraid," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have had a good life, Penelope, the best life because of you." Penelope's tears fell freely, but she smiled through them, squeezing his hand. "You gave me everything," she said. "You were my salvation, my love, my partner in all things. I do not know how to be in this world without you." "You will be fine," Zachariah assured her, his thumb brushing away her tears one last time. "You are the strongest person I know, and I will be waiting for you when your time comes. We will find each other again, just like we found each other that day. I promise you that." He died peacefully an hour later, with Penelope holding his hand and the whole family gathered around. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a spreading cottonwood tree that he had planted himself their first year together. The entire town turned out for the funeral, testament to the impact Zachariah Abbott had made on Scottsbluff and everyone who knew him. Penelope grieved deeply, as was only natural after losing the love of her life. But she did not break, did not crumble. She was, as Zachariah had said, the strongest person anyone knew. She continued to live at the ranch, helping Zachary manage things as her health allowed, spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And every evening, she would walk up to that hill and sit by Zachariah's grave, telling him about her day. She lived for another 12 years, watching the world change in ways that would have seemed impossible on that dusty August day in 1882, when she had collapsed on a cowboy's land. She saw the automobile become commonplace, saw the first airplane fly overhead, saw women gain the right to vote and reveled in casting her ballot. She saw her family continue to grow and prosper, saw her children become grandparents themselves, saw the legacy she and Zachariah had built continue into a new generation. When Penelope died in the winter of 1930, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73, they buried her next to Zachariah under that cottonwood tree. The whole county came to pay their respects to the woman who had come west as a broken bride and had become a pillar of the community, a loving mother and grandmother, and proof that even the darkest circumstances could lead to light. At the funeral, Patricia stood before the assembled crowd and spoke about her parents, about the love they had shared and the example they had set. She talked about how her father had found her mother when she had nothing left, how he had given her not just shelter but safety, not just care but love. She talked about how they had built a life together based on respect and partnership and unwavering devotion, and how that foundation had allowed them to weather every storm. "My mother used to tell me," Patricia said, her voice strong despite her tears, "that she died that day on my father's land, the woman she had been, broken and afraid and convinced she had no value. And that my father helped her be reborn as someone new, someone who could love and be loved, someone who could stand tall and face the world without fear. But my father would say that my mother saved him too, that she took a lonely cowboy who had resigned himself to a solitary life and showed him what it meant to truly live. They saved each other again and again, every day for almost 36 years. That is what love is. That is what they taught us." After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch house, sharing stories and memories, laughing through their tears. And if anyone had climbed that hill as the sun set that evening, they would have seen two shadows beneath the cottonwood tree, indistinct in the fading light, sitting close together as the stars emerged one by one overhead. The same stars that had witnessed a woman collapse in the dust and a cowboy carry her inside. The same stars that had shone over every moment of their remarkable love story. The ranch remained in the Abbott family for generations, each successive keeper of the land honoring the legacy of Zachariah and Penelope. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original bedroom where Penelope had recovered was preserved as it had been, a small museum to a love story that had started with exhaustion and desperation, and had transformed into something that transcended time itself. And on quiet summer evenings, when the wind blew just right across the Nebraska prairie, people swore they could hear singing, an old cavalry song carried on the breeze, and see the faint outline of two figures on the hill, sitting together in eternal contentment, their love as enduring and constant as the land itself, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of the human spirit, and the transformative miracle of true love. The story of how Penelope Sutherland collapsed from exhaustion on Zachariah Abbott's land, how the cowboy carried her inside and let her rest for days, and how that act of simple humanity blossomed into one of the greatest love stories Scottsbluff had ever known, became the stuff of local legend. Parents told it to their children, who told it to their children, each generation finding hope and inspiration in the tale of two people who found each other when they needed it most and built something beautiful from the ruins of their pasts. And in the end, was that not what the West was all about? Not just the harsh landscape and the hard work, not just the danger and the struggle, but also the possibility of reinvention, of starting over, of finding redemption and love in the most unexpected places. Zachariah and Penelope embodied that spirit, lived it fully, and left behind not just descendants and property, but a legacy of love that would endure as long as the grass grew and the sun rose over the Nebraska plains. A love story written in dust and determination, in kindness and courage, in two hearts that beat as one from that fateful August day in 1882, until they drew their last breaths, and beyond, into eternity.